Hi everyone. Today I'm doing this tutorial because I was fortunate enough to capture the creation of this piece on my phone. It didn't conk out on me or anything. So we're going to use Scotch tape to hold down a half sheet of this Kirkland brand photo quality paper. I'm going to be using, you'll see it says glossy. I'm actually going to use the non-glossy or the matte side, which would be considered the back side. It's coated and it takes alcohol inks really well. It lets them move around. And so I've cut that 8.5 by 11 sheet in half for this piece. I was being very gutsy. And that's the shiny side. Here's the matte side we want to use. And so back to the Scotch tape, I've rolled up a couple of small loops of it, and I'm just going to put those on and adhere that paper to my Lazy Susan, which also has some press and seal on it just to protect the Lazy Susan. So I'm going to be using 91% solution isopropyl alcohol or rubbing alcohol today. I've got some of it in this little bottle. It has a beautiful, teeny weeny little nozzle on it. It's really meant for quilling. So I have had glue in this bottle as well. I don't at the moment. What it has is that 91% rubbing alcohol in it. We're going to use some raisin alcohol ink, raspberry, one of my favorite colors, and pink sorbet or sherbet, depending on where you're from. And I thought about using the limeade, but I never did end up using it. And it's tricky when you're mixing red and green, but that's a whole other tutorial. That was just some paper towel. I'm just showing you a dirty old paper towel that I use and have on my lap. And it's good to have it around. And that's my airbrush, and it's connected to an air compressor that blows air through it. And it's just in lieu of me blowing through a straw or using some other kind of a blowing tool. Tim Holtz has one out that's it's really meant for his markers, his distress markers, to spray kind of a fine mist, but that, I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, it's a blowing tool and it can work equally as well. I just find, of course, that when you've got the airbrush, you can actually regulate the amount of air that's coming out. You can stop and start, of course, the flow with the trigger on the top. If you look at my index fingers on the trigger. And there's no ink inside my airbrush. It is just the air I'm using. So I bring down some raspberry, really randomly. I put it sort of on or near where I've already established this little pool of red color. Each of those is going to be the centers from which the petals will be made. So that's why I dropped them. I knew I wanted 3 flowers. I just sort of thought, well, I'll make a triangle of them. And what I'm doing here is stopping the ink from moving any further by drying it. Because, you know, as you'll see here in a moment, this technique relies on all of those pigments being in one place. You can certainly mix them up. They're not going to mix too much. And this is the last one, the pink sorbet. Very, very light pink, but it will still show through, which is, again, the beauty of this technique and of alcohol ink. And don't get me wrong, alcohol ink can get really muddy and kind of brown and funky. You might not like it. I've just found with this technique, if you kind of stick to the same colors, and black, by the way, if you use that, I've done another video called Mermaid Flower, and if you use black as your sort of darkest color, it will actually break down into blues and purples. So you get some really interesting color combinations that come out of these. But anyhow, back to what we're doing, and I'm just drying them again. So I'm going to work on each of these separately, and what I'm really going to do is the same all the way around. I'm going to take a little drop of the alcohol, let it sit, watch it. When you feel like you want to go in there and hit it with that air, but that's not the best tack for this particular technique. And you see there's something sitting on there with a round circle of white around it. That's a piece of debris. I have no idea what it is, but hey, it's a craft room, so there can be all kinds of things. And you'll see me come in with a little weeding tool, and I'll pick that off. Just because I don't want it to be embedded in the image. It would probably disappear actually by the end of by the finishing of this particular picture, but I didn't know what it was going to look like at the end, and I don't like little things just sitting there looking funny. So I come in, because alcohol ink dries really quickly, I can actually come in right next to it. I drop down, again, some of the alcohol, kind of watch it, pick up some of the color, and then slowly move it forward. And you can work on your technique to get all perfectly the same petals if you wish. You can get really skinny petals. You can fold petals back on themselves. You can get them wider or thicker like I'm doing here. It's taken me a while to learn how to do this, but it's not sort of the be-all and the end-all. It's just that sometimes you want thicker petals. So there, this one turns into 4 separate petals. And what I'll probably end up doing, I can't recall by every single step, but I believe I combine them. And so that's the other thing to keep in mind when you're using alcohol ink. So forgiving, like many mediums. Like it doesn't matter. If you don't like something, it can be removed by placing a bit of alcohol on it, blotting it off with a paper towel if you find it that reprehensible. But I find that most everything I do there, I made funny little things, and I thought, okay, well, there's an opportunity to learn in a couple of minutes how to cover them up, because that's not the look I was going for. But as I was saying, it's very forgiving. And so be forgiving of yourself too. There is no wrong. Everything can be changed and moved and altered. And I mean, I take pictures sometimes of my projects as I'm working on them, because as I've always said, when I'm doing the alcohol tutorials, the big question is, when do you want to stop? So sometimes what I'll do is take a picture, take a look at it, I edit it, like I crop it, so I can only see the picture, I spin it around, and then I'll come back, and I generally don't wipe it all out or anything like that, but when you step away and then come back and take a look at it, oftentimes you see opportunities to put things in that you wouldn't in the heat of the moment. I can't really do that in a tutorial as much. Oh, a little fleck of something else, and we come with the easy. You just pull it off. And again, ooh, that's not a mess. It's just another shadow. Or it's an opportunity to learn how to fix it, if you will. And I use fix with, my hand quotes up in the air. Because it's not, I mean, one person's, great beauty is another person's what's that? So it's entirely up to you. So I'm going to chat away, as I often do, and say that part of, one very important part of doing this type of, using this medium is because alcohol inks are solvent. They, and that's why you use alcohol to break them down and not water. And because alcohol inks are flammable, if you look at any of the bottles, you'll see that there's the little danger signal. So they're not only flammable, they light on fire easily, so does the alcohol. You need to be very, not only careful from a fire standpoint, although we're not using anything hot here, that's true, but when you store them, you want to make sure that they're in a very safe place. They're not in a really hot place. They can't build up pressure, that kind of thing. The inks aren't as bad in terms of being dangerous. I would just say anything that's flammable or poisonous, which these are also, I would keep away from, tiny hands and things like that. I also have really good ventilation. I'm very fortunate because I have ventilation that will remove the air in my studio in the colder months, but I also have a door to my studio, which is right there, which is open while I'm doing this. So if I'm moving these inks and alcohol around, it's evaporating, and if it's evaporating in the air I breathe, that's not a good thing over a period of time. So I'm very careful about that. You could wear a respirator if you wish to. I have not acquired a respirator. If somebody told me that I had to, or was doing something dangerous, I would certainly do that. I'm quite careful to blow away from me as well. And I will mention that the fumes can be harmful to pets, small kids, people with compromised health, that kind of thing. So you just want to be very aware of that. It's not that they need to be even in close proximity. They're in the house. So do some reading on it if you want to know more about it. And that'll be my PSA for this video. And as you'll see it and we move along, what I'm really intrigued with about this particular one is that where the original inks were dropped, those sort of center pieces from where we've been blowing this ink out, there started to form this really interesting center area and it almost looks like stamen exist already. Ordinarily with these pieces I go back in at the end after I've done all the petals and I drop in stamen with, it could be with alcohol ink and a dotting tool. Sometimes I use Nuvo drops. You could actually, if it's still kind of damp and tacky in the middle, if you want to drop some alcohol ink on there, you could also drop some craft foil or deco foil. So that would give you that center look. What I realized as I was doing this particular piece is like that first one that I've done up on, well, it's now on the bottom left of the screen and moving around to the top. You can see that there's shadows and light there that have taken on the shape of where those inks were first dropped. So that's kind of a happy, I won't even call it accident. It's just a circumstance, and it saves me a whole other step. It looks very natural, kind of organic to me, which I really like. I don't like perfect circles and things, particularly for flowers. And these are really abstract, so I can do whatever I want. If you are, wanting to achieve something a bit more unorganic or perfect and very round, then you can certainly go back in afterward, as I was saying a moment ago, which is what I've been doing on most of my projects, and you can almost draw in that center stamen laden area in the middle and yeah, make it look exactly the way you want it. You could come back in with a different color of ink. Some people just do black and white inks. The inks kind of layer on one another, and depending on if the alcohol inks are wet or not, you will mix the ink. So the rule is that if the alcohol ink has dried, and this again, I'm only referring to the center part. So if you've dabbled on some alcohol ink in the middle to put on some little black dots, for example, and you let those dots dry and then come back in with the little dotting tool and white ink, as an example, the white ink will sit on top of the black. If you do that while the black ink is still a little bit wet, the two will mix a bit. So you get variations of grays, and some will still remain black and some will still remain white, and it can be very, very beautiful, very natural looking. In this case, what happens is that much like black alcohol ink, which we're not using in this piece, but much like it, these reds are breaking down and ultimately they turn into a really beautiful lilac color, which is really what that center area is. So you're seeing from that center area the very heart, if you will, of the pigments and the lightest tone of them. So I can't think of a more natural look to them than this. And we're nearly at the end. I say that with such confidence, I'm not entirely sure, but it looks to me as though we're fairly close to the end. And as you can see, it went by fairly quickly. I was really pleasantly surprised that it all worked out this well. I have not done multiple flowers using this technique yet. This was my first attempt. And so to actually have not only the attempt work out and make a really nice piece like this, but also to realize that my camera really was set up correctly and it was recording the whole time, because I can't even tell you how many tutorials I've sat down, organized myself, got everything ready. I've gone through the entire piece and then taken down my camera, which is on my phone, and realized, well, it wasn't recording at all. So very, very pleased that this worked out the way it did. And then for these last bits, if you will, I'm trying to take in an overall view as much as I can of where the negative space is, what remains of the white space, how it looks to me in terms of balance, and where I want more color to go. And again, I'm very pleased with the variations on the color. Some people prefer to have a more consistent looking colors and variations. If that's what you're after, I would just suggest that you practice and you'll start to understand, depending on what the tool is that you're using, whether it's your lungs blowing through a straw, or if it is an airbrush, or one of those tools I was talking about earlier that Tim Holtz has out for spreading, sort of spritzing. I think it's called a spritzer. I'm really sorry I don't have the name in front of me, but anyhow, depending on what that tool is, depending on your style and so on, you will develop your own style based on your own preference. And if you're looking for uniformity, that's definitely a practiced skill. So that's something that will come with time. I would just, if I were you, just get accustomed as I have to how everything feels and what appeals to you. So in this case, I'm really hoping to achieve a watercolor appearance and something very suggestive of flowers. It doesn't have to look exactly like flowers. And I want a certain softness. So I'm attempting as much as I can to make those petal areas, if you will, really look nice and round. And as you can see, I mean, I play quite a bit with the brush. This is a relatively new thing, this airbrush for me. I've never used ink inside the actual brush as most people would when they get an airbrush. I've only used air, but I'll tell you, just getting accustomed to that how much air comes out. And by the way, for people who have condenser units, compression units and airbrushes, I've got this set in this case at about 20 psi, which is fairly low. I don't want the amount of air to come out for this particular technique in a really strong burst. Strong bursts will make long, skinny trails, and so I adjust it down to about 20 psi. So here's where I did my quick sit back and decided that there was just a couple of places I wanted to go back to. And again, as if you've been watching along, really not a lot of, there's nothing complex about this. It really, again, it's a technique, and it is something that you will learn to feel comfortable with and pleased with when it comes to your own work. And the other thing I want to mention is that you'll see in some of them, like I'm doing here, where I felt that the pigment had trailed off too much to the end of that petal, I dropped a little bit of the alcohol on the end of the petal and then blew it up toward the flower, and that creates even more veins and shadows and interest. And so there you have it. That will be a wrap for this one. I really appreciate you dropping by. Thanks, and do leave your comments at the end. I always enjoy your feedback. Bye for now.